This is Matthew Cratter from Bitcoin University, and today I wanted to talk about what it's like to peer into the mind of a no-coiner, that is, someone who doesn't own any Bitcoin but is still very hostile towards it. And as part of this, we're going to get to examine some classic Bitcoin FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So a couple of months ago, I made this video, What Happens to Stocks and Real Estate in Hyperinflation, and I think something I said in there rubbed Michael Dalton, 8374, the wrong way. And this was his comment: $6 billion worth of Bitcoin was seized by the US government in March. To think it is independent is fantasy. In a hyperinflationary scenario, no electricity means no access. Intrinsic value cannot be maintained if flicking the power switch ends it. So allow me to translate. When I get comments like this that use a whole bunch of FUD at once, this is what I hear. I hear someone saying, I'm getting increasingly annoyed hearing about this Bitcoin thing. I don't understand a single thing about Bitcoin, but I'm unwilling to do any real work to try to understand even the very basics of how it works. Therefore, I will collect a bunch of different excuses garnered by skimming headlines in the mainstream media that I can dump on anyone when they mention this Bitcoin thing. So this is what I would say to my dear brother in arms, Daniel. You are correct. Electricity is very important to our modern world, and if the electricity goes off and stays off globally, we have some very, very big problems on our hands, and Bitcoin is probably the least of them. And I would say to Daniel that it's quite likely that he is not prepared for a scenario like this either. If the electricity goes down and stays down forever, lots of things will obviously stop working, like Daniel's well, his electric pump, his filtration system, assuming he's doing something sort of off-grid here, his bank's ATM, his phone, his entire online life. And even if Daniel were to be completely off-grid and have gold bars and silver coins, I don't think he or anyone is really prepared for the social unrest and the global crime that would sweep across the world if the electricity went down and stayed down. But here's the thing about Bitcoin. There are copies of the Bitcoin blockchain in every country on earth on all of the nodes that are running them. The Bitcoin blockchain does not get erased when the power goes off. Instead, it just sits there patiently, waits for the power to come back on anywhere in the world, and then it starts working instantly, unlike the banking system, which would take weeks or months or even years to get up and running again. This is always the weird thing about gold bugs. Why is it that most gold bugs' chief reason for hodling gold is that human civilization is going to be plunged into permanent darkness? Even if that were to happen, there are many, many assets that I would want to own before precious metals. I'd want to own land, some sort of garden, water, or well with a hand pump in case electricity wasn't working, and also tools of self-defense, these sort of things. So I think it makes sense, actually, if you have gold and you're preparing in this way, sell your gold, buy Bitcoin, and buy real-world essentials like these. If you're enjoying this video so far, I just ask you to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future topic, and also share this video with a friend. What about the rest of Daniel's comment? $6 billion worth of Bitcoin was seized by the US government in March. To think it is independent is fantasy. I would say this is another example of sloppy thinking, because whether Bitcoin is independent, decentralized, etc., is one question, and the answer to that, of course, is yes. What Daniel is saying, though, here, and he's confusing the two things, is Bitcoin, can it be seized? That is a separate question. And the answer to that is yes, your Bitcoin can be seized if you store your private keys online, whether on a cloud server, as we're about to see in a later example, in a digital photo, in an email, on Evernote, on Google Drive, anywhere like this. And if someone finds those keys, they can then do a transaction, sign that transaction with those keys, and move your Bitcoin to a Bitcoin address that they control and that you no longer control. Your Bitcoin can also be seized if you give someone your private keys, your recovery seed, whether under stress or threat of torture, etc. And it is true, criminals and governments can selectively attack people and try to take their keys, but they cannot do this to millions and millions of people. It's just not practical. It's also really difficult for them to do this to you if you're using multi-sig to secure your Bitcoin and your private keys are geographically dispersed. So I would ask Michael Dalton, where are you storing your savings, and is it actually more secure than Bitcoin? Your safe deposit box can be seized, and in a real crisis, the banks would close and stay closed for many months or years. Your brokerage account or bank account can obviously be frozen. The government or other criminals can march into your house and rip it apart to find your gold and silver quite easily. Also, asset forfeiture laws allow governments to seize your house and land. So the question for Michael is, are any of these savings vehicles less prone to seizure than Bitcoin. No, they're absolutely not. Can you take any of these savings vehicles, Daniel, with you to a new country if you need to? Nope, you can't do that either. Good luck crossing the border with your pockets full of silver coins. This just will never work. Meanwhile, Bitcoiners can go anywhere in the world and take $1 billion worth of Bitcoin in a brain wallet, and no one even knows what they're carrying in their brain. I think what Daniel is referring to in his comment is various articles like this. The U.S. government has $5 billion worth of Bitcoin. This was thanks to some analysis done by @21Co, and they were able to guess what various amounts of Bitcoin are being held by the U.S. government. We have the Silk Road seizure, we have the Bitfinex hack seizure, and the James Zhang seizure. And if you add these up, you end up with roughly almost 200,000 Bitcoin that are currently valued at 6.7 billion. So Bitcoin, of course, keeps going up to Daniel's dismay, and the value of the government's Bitcoin keeps going up as well. But this was indeed seized. We can just look at one example. I've covered these other examples before. Fed seized $3.6 billion in Bitcoin stolen from the Bitfinex hack. So Bitfinex is a cryptocurrency exchange that was hacked in August of 2016, and 119,756 Bitcoin were taken. And then the U.S. government was able to find the people who took it. It was Ilya Lichtenstein and his wife, Heather R. Morgan. Funny thing about Heather, she's also known as Razzle Khan. We covered this a few years back. She's probably the worst rapper of all time. I'll link to her video, Versace Bedouin, in the description notes below. So how is the U.S. government able to take this Bitcoin from these people if Bitcoin cannot be seized? If we look at the report from the Justice Department, on January 31st, 2022, law enforcement gained access to one of these wallets by decrypting a file saved to Ilya Lichtenstein's cloud storage account, which had been obtained pursuant to a search warrant. The file contained a list of 2,000 virtual currency addresses along with corresponding private keys. So unfortunately for Ilya, who's clearly a criminal as well, he was storing his private keys in the cloud in an encrypted file. But if you're storing stuff online, if you're storing your private keys online, at some point someone's going to find them and take your Bitcoin. Now, what does the U.S. government do when it gets this Bitcoin? It slowly auctions it off over time. There's a lot of fears that they're going to suddenly dump it and try to move down the price, which would be wonderful because Bitcoin hodlers and the Bitcoin faithful would step in and be able to buy Bitcoin for $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 a coin. I don't think that's going to happen, but that is, rather than being a nightmare scenario, that's actually would be a wonderful scenario. There is a interesting website that Jameson Lopp put together on GitHub showing how much Bitcoin the U.S. government has seized over the years, and they've auctioned almost all of this off. And he does a nice calculation here where he has the total value that the U.S. government has gained by selling this Bitcoin that they confiscated from people. They've gained about $366 million. But the potential gains they missed if instead they had hodled is close to $6.4 billion. At some point, the U.S. government's going to wake up and realize that it should be hodling this stuff rather than selling it off. Finally, the last sort of buzzword that Michael Dalton decided to throw into his comment was this idea of intrinsic value, which is, of course, another critique of Bitcoin, that it doesn't have any intrinsic value. This is something I talk about in this video. That's a whole different rabbit hole. But you can tell when people start throwing all these different ideas together, they're just trying to throw everything but the kitchen sink at Bitcoin and hope that some of it sticks. But I do discuss intrinsic value in this video, which I'll link to in the description notes below. If I had to guess, I would guess that Michael Dalton is probably a gold bug, and this has not been a good decade for them. Not only are gold bugs aging out, but they're also dropping out of the game as their purchasing power evaporates against Bitcoin. If you're holding significant amounts of your net worth in gold and silver, this is something you have to understand, because unfortunately you're going to continue to get poorer relative to people who own Bitcoin. This is a chart of gold denominated in Bitcoin. It's just completely gone off a cliff, and it will continue to go off a cliff as Bitcoin demonetizes gold. Here's the other thing, which I've talked about before. How many millennials and Gen Z will keep their parents' gold when they inherit it? I would say very, very few. Most will dump it for Bitcoin or lesser tokens. And we're seeing this because gold's demographics are absolutely terrible, even in places that really love their gold, like India. I'll link to this article even from 2018, and I think it's gotten worse Since then, Indians are falling out of love with gold, and millennials are partly to blame. The younger generation is more focused on buying smartphones than gold. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.